Hey everyone, this is Draio with another damn level. Today I'm going to introduce a build that I call the Ice Witch build. It's a middle-of-the-road build that deals decent damage, but also provides a lot of support for groups, teams, whether you're in PvP, dungeons, most of the situations you're going to find yourself in. It also has really good solo potential due to the amount of healing that's in it, and it's just in general a pretty tough build, especially for a caster type. So this video is going to go over the gear and traits that go into that build. This build is pretty easy to play. It's not very hard to wrap your head around. Most of the difficulty that comes with this build comes from paying attention to when you can combine your area effects with finishers, like blast finishers, which most of the time will come from Frozen Burst. This can be played at a reasonably low level. You don't need a lot of really advanced skills. I'm going to go over the skills that you need here in your bar. We use a lot of glyphs, which are specific to whatever element you're attuned to, which is it's a mechanic that I particularly like. I really enjoy how that works. This build stays primarily pretty much in water all the time, and that's where we get a lot of our support, and then most of our damage is actually done through Ice Bow and Ice Storm here. And then these are to supplement getting like stacks of vulnerability, making sure the enemy is chilled, because we have some gear on us that supplement those two particular conditions on our enemies that will boost our damage by a reasonable amount, by about 27%. So skill wise, we have Ethereal Renewal, and this is the reason we take this instead of the glyph of Elemental Harmony here is A, the cooldown. Its cooldown is 15 seconds. Our glyph, even with our traits, is 20 seconds. And while this glyph heals for 4,000, and this doesn't heal for quite as much, this removes a condition with every pulse, and that's 8 pulses. So this is our condition control. Whereas this, it'll give us some buffs, and it heals for a little more, which is nice. However, the ability to get rid of 8 conditions in a single heal skill is really what we're looking for, because you need to be able to keep yourself up and away from those conditions, or keep those conditions off of you as much as possible, so you can support the team. It can be traded out. I just don't think you get quite as much value with the Glyph of Elemental Harmony as you do with Ethereal Renewal. Next is Ice Bow. This is where a lot of the versatility of this build comes in, because it can be close combat because we're running dual daggers here, but Ice Bow allows us to go into a ranged situation and still have good damage and good support. For those of you that don't know, Ice Bow is you place it on the ground and it will spawn one in your hand like this. So someone else can pick one up here and it spawns one in your hand, and then it replaces your skill bar here. So it gives us AoE abilities like that. Water arrow, which heals us, and then wherever that arrow lands, it'll heal people around it. Its damage is pretty minimal, but it's not too bad. Again, this is mainly for support. Frost volley makes a really nice damaging skill, because it does about 1,000 damage a pop right now. But really we want that 5 stacks of vulnerability. And it looks like this. So it's a single target where you'll fire off 5 shots, each inflict 1 vulnerability. And then you have Frostban, which applies shield, which again is another condition that we're really looking after. And it is like a cone in front of you. The 4th skill you saw, and then the 5th skill, bring it back up here, is Deep Freeze. So this is chilled for 1.5 seconds with 5 stacks, and it puts them in a solid block of ice, but you have to stay still and you have to channel it. So it's a hard disable that helps a lot with a fair amount of bosses. I've come to realize that it actually works on a fair amount of bosses. Some have resist, but a fair amount of them don't, and it works quite well. So Then we move on to Ice Storm. This is a glyph that causes an AoE, much like the Ice Bow, and the idea is you overlap those two, and you can deal out a significant amount of damage. So it looks like this. It's big AoE, just like the bow. Fair amount of damage, and I believe it is, let's see, 6 seconds, yeah, 18 impacts. That's what we're really looking for. It's a fair amount of impacts. Granted, it does cover a area, which means there's a potential that a lot of them won't hit the target, but it's really nice for group management because it also chills. And again, that ties into some of the gear we're going to have. One of the traits that we take makes it so using a glyph will also give us regen when we're attuned to water. The last two are your elementals. These two I use, or we will use for their combo fields and to keep mobs off you. They spawn an AI mob that looks like this. Now this is the lesser one. The glyph of elements here creates a greater one, which is basically just bigger. But the smaller one has a skill that after you summon it can use it's an AoE ability that it'll only use in combat, but every 60, or sorry, I think it's every 20 seconds it can use it. And when it goes down, it leaves an AoE field that you can Ice Burst or Frozen Burst into it, which will trigger auras for everyone. The larger one, see, it's a little bigger. It has a skill that heals everything around it, and I can't tell if it has a blast finisher on it or not. It doesn't appear so, but it's a great heal, and it can absorb quite a lot of damage and keep a lot of mobs off your back as you're trying to run around, make sure everything has chilled and vulnerable on it. So when you do lay down the ice storm and the AoE, another ice storm from the bow, that everything's getting maximum damage. So these help keep things up, keep you up, keep your allies up, and absorb quite a bit of damage. So those are the skills that we're going to use for this particular build. We're going to now go over the traits that go along with this. So it's 4, 4, 4, and 2. That's 4 in air, 4 in earth, 4 in water, 2 in arcana. We're going to go down the list. So first is air magic. The first one we go in here is quick glyphs, for a pretty obvious reason. We have 3 glyphs on our board, which means the more we can use those, the more our damage is going to go out, and the longer and the more often we can have these elementals up means more damage reduction and more combo fields, which is going to mean a lot of frost auras that are going to go out, and it's going to work pretty nicely. So again, this could also synergize well with the glyph of elemental harmony here, but again, I don't feel it's worth it in this particular case because we aren't going to be rotating through our elements quite as much, which means we aren't going to be reattuning to water and getting rid of a lot of elements or a lot of conditions. So again, either or renewal. Next is inscription. This is the one that makes it so we get regen every time we cast a glyph. And we take this because it will help keep us up for the lack of healing that Ethereal Renewal really does. So Ethereal Renewal does 639 per pulse, as opposed to the 4,835 plus the 1,918 we'd get from Glyph of Elemental Harmony. So as we continue to cast our glyphs here, we'll continue to get more and more health regen. Plus we're attuned to water, which means we're always regenerating health. Next is earth. We went in here for the toughness, not necessarily the condition damage. We don't really do a whole lot of condition damage, really at all, with this build. We don't do burning, no bleeding, nothing like that. All our conditions are CC, and buff the damage output given to a particular mob. So in here, we give grant protection when applying an aura to yourself or an ally. This synergizes with Frost Aura here, and again, when our Glyph of Lesser Elementals go down, and it uses that AoE skill, and then we Frozen Burst inside of it, it'll give everyone inside that area a Frost Aura, and consequently a stack of protection. and since Frost Aura already gives us 10% reduction in damage, paired with protection, that's a 43% reduction in damage taken for a couple seconds, which can stack up pretty quickly, especially in an elongated fight. Next, we take Stone Splinters. We deal more damage when you're within 600 units of your target. It's a small damage increase, but it will stack very nicely with the way our water line works and the way some of our gear works. So we're stacking percentages of damage with this build. Next is Water. We took it for the Vitality. We wanted to be a little tough because we are going to be in melee range. Now, we don't have quite as much health as I would really prefer, but with the way this build works, you have a lot of healing, you've got a lot of regen, and you're always getting health back. So first trait in here is while we're attuned to water, your spells deal more damage to vulnerable foes. This is a 20% increase in damage if they're vulnerable, which is what our Vapor Blade here is for. And the second skill on Contra Frostbow, the Frost Volley. So as long as we can keep those vulnerability stacks, even if it's just one stack of vulnerability, you'll get a 20% increased damage to that particular mob. And this works really well paired with the Ice Storms that both the Ice Bow and our Glyph of Storms here gives us. If we can pair those two fields damage with the Chilled, which you'll see how that ties in when we go over the gear, and everything has at least one stack of vulnerability, and you're in 600 units of your target, that's 10%, that's 30%. If they only have one stack of vulnerability, that's 1 more percent, that's 31% more damage you'll be doing to those particular mobs. Next is reduces the recharge on all water weapon skills. This was the pretty natural choice since we don't really rotate out of water for this particular build. I wanted to make it pretty simple. And pretty well rounded, not a whole lot of complexity here. It makes it so we get to cast our weapon skills more often. That's really it. More damage reduction, more healing with Cleansing Wave, Frozen Burst more with that Blast Finisher, Cone of Cold, which is oddly enough one of your most damaging skills, that also heals, which is quite nice. Last is Arcana. I wasn't entirely sure where to put these last 2 points, and I went through this. I ran this build in PvP and in dungeons with a couple people, and tried a couple different things in the trait lines that I've already taken. Nothing was particularly useful. What I found to be useful, however, is Windborne Dagger. Sorry. It gives us a 25% boost in movement speed with this particular build because we're using dual daggers. And I found that to actually be really crucial because of things like with our Conjured Frostbow, when you use Ice Storm, it's a channeled skill. You have to hold still while you cast that, which means you need some time and distance between you and the enemy, and that Windborne Dagger takes care of that pretty handily. It's really quite nice. That paired with your Chilled, which is a couple seconds of movement speed reduction, you'll be able to get around and outmaneuver most people pretty easily without much problem. I found that to be particularly useful in PvP. You can get away, you can outmaneuver, you can get places a lot faster than other people, especially for those capture points. So I found Windborne Dagger to be the most useful out of the skills, instead of things like Powerful Aura, which it's useful and it's good for groups, but I feel the value of Windborne with the ability to get around way more than other people, paired with your slow. The value of that is way more than I think most people give credit for. So that's traits. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. All have a definite use. The minor traits, I'm not too worried about. Like Zephyr Speed is pretty useless because we're never in air. Lightning Strike, we don't really attune to air, so we're not too worried about it. Earthern Blast, again, tuning to Earth. Again, attuned to Earth. The water ones will be the most useful. Obviously, Soothing Mist, you regen health, you and your party and your allies regen health while you're in the water attunement. Healing Ripple, Again, we aren't going in and out of attunements like we were, say, like in the Arcane Surge build, so this isn't too applicable. Arcane Fury, same thing. Switching, not a whole lot, doesn't matter a whole lot. So we're going to go over to gear now and look at what we have. So with this particular build, I'm level 80, but I'm in a 77 zone for some reason for the backdrop. So I have about 1750 power with this particular build, which isn't a whole lot, but the point of this build is that it's okay at most things. Like, you can deal fair damage, you can heal for a fair amount and be pretty comfortable with it. Your survivability is pretty mid-range. You're very sticky. You're a caster that doesn't go down a whole lot, but you can support a lot, but you can deal some damage. It's kind of interesting. Our toughness is at 1600. Again, 1796 there. Yeah, 1800 power. So pretty middle of the road. Not great, not awful. But that's kind of what this build does. When I don't know a situation, I don't know the people I'm running with, I'll run this quite a lot, because unlike the Arcane Surge build, which really needs some backup in all of the dungeon situations to pull off like that huge melee rotation, this you can get away with. Everything's pretty quick. You don't have any crazy combos. The feels are pretty, that you combo with from your elemental and everything, are pretty straightforward. They don't require any massive setup or anything like that build does. So, middle of the road. The kind of gear that I'm running on here is actually a soldier's power, toughness, vitality, because we're more worried about staying alive, putting those conditions on, and supporting allies with this particular build. Or if you're by yourself, you're more worried about the long game, getting those stacks of vulnerability, laying down those ice storms, and having your elementals absorb a fair amount of the damage. So it's power, toughness, vitality. That is all the gear that I have on here, is all soldier's gear. Same thing. So with these, I took a little bit of healing power, and a little bit of healing power will up the amount of healing that's obviously done from your cleansing wave, which will help allies a little bit. So again, middle of the road. It's okay at healing, it's okay at damage. It's not a super high damage, but it's not super high healing. And then the last part of this here is the Superior Ruin of Ice. Now this is where having chilled on enemies is really going to help. So it gives us vitality, but we get a plus 10% increase to chill duration, which is great. 25% chance when you're struck to release an Ice Nova. Also really useful. Again, we don't rely on it for much, but it's more stacks of chilled when it does go off, which is really nice. More vitality, and then the last trait's what we really want. So we get a grand total of 30% increased chill duration, which is fantastic, but we get a plus 7% damage against chilled foes. So if you remember from our traits, if they're vulnerable, we do 20% more damage. If we're within 600 units, we do an additional 10% damage. This makes it so if they're chill, we also do an extra 7% damage. That's 37% more damage for having two conditions on them that you could give out in spades, with Frozen Burst and with Vapor Blade. And with Ice Storm. And then your Ice Volley from Conjured Frostbow and the other Ice Storm from Frostbow. On top of that, you'll be doing 1% more damage for every stack of vulnerability. So if you've got them up to 20 stacks of vulnerability, which is pretty easy with Vapor Blade, that's a huge amount of damage that you can pump out. You know, you can be doing 57% plus if you get those stacks up there. In addition, those stacks will also help all your party members as well. So that's the beginning of this build, and that's the gear and the stats. Again, we're also using double daggers here, and I'll go over the sigils. So we use Sigil of Peril, which is increase inflicted vulnerability duration by 20%. So just so that vulnerability sticks a little longer, so we're at 7 at 1/4 second here, which is a fair amount of time, and every time they get hit that refreshes, which again, I'll show you how Vapor Blade works. That works really well. On the second dagger we have Superior Residual Frailty, 50% chance on hit to inflict vulnerability. Again, more vulnerability, and it's a 10-second stack of vulnerability, which is quite nice. It does have a 2-second internal cooldown, but that's not too much of a problem because we can keep those stacks up with Vapor Blade really easily. So there we go. That is gear, and that is traits for the Ice Witch build. That's it. This is a much simpler build than the Arcane Surge build, the last build that I did. And hopefully players that are kind of leveling up will be able to kind of go into this build a little easier. The skills that are involved you can get reasonably quickly. Like, it doesn't require any of the last tier skills. So the Glyph of Storms here, obviously. Then the Ethereal Renewal, I believe, is the skill that Elementalists start with for healing. It's either that or the Glyph of Elemental Harmony. I believe you have these two to start with. And then Frostbow is in your second tier, which isn't too bad. They only cost 3 to purchase, whereas Glyph of Storms only cost 1 now, which is quite nice. And then the Glyph of Lesser Elementals also cost 3. So grand total, you need 7 skill points to run the skills here. So it's not that hard. It's pretty easy to get your hands on. And then the elite skill you won't get to your 30 anyways, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. So it's really not that bad. It's a very good beginner build because you're not doing a whole lot of rotations, which you'll see in the actual rotation video after this. So I would highly suggest if you're new to this class, if you're new to the game, this is a great build to start out with because you won't be doing a whole lot of rotating. The complexity is pretty low, but it also teaches you how to keep an eye out for the combo fields from your elementals and how to pair things with them, like Frozen Burst. So that's it. That is all there is to this build, gear and trait wise. I will be back with another video that shows the rotations that we use. This one does not have a traditional rotation, like you just do this over and over again. It's a pretty situational build. It's a pretty, like, as soon as it's up you use it kind of build. If the elementals are there, you use the elementals. If Glyph of Storms and Conjure Frostbows up, we'll tend to use those, and in what order we use those, and when to look out for your stacks of vulnerability and your stacks of chill when those go up, and how many of those stacks that you have when you pop these things. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next video.